Before we continue, I want to leave a disclaimer here at the front. This week, we will be talking about death and dying, including but not limited to suicide and murder. If contents of this nature are something that is troubling to you, please feel free to skip this episode. This is a content warning. We will be talking about suicide and murder and those type things. And so if that is something that is a struggle to you, please, I would rather you skip this than didn't deal with that. It's totally fine. The other thing is, if you are struggling with thoughts of suicide, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is something that is available to you 24 hours in multiple languages, and that number is 800-273-8255. We here at Privy, we love you, and we want you to get help if it is needed. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Privy, potty friends. If you're new to Privy, this is a podcast about toilet culture, history, and etiquette recorded from my home toilet. Toilet. My name is Hunter, and I really like toilets. It's a healthy appreciation. And I hope to share that with you a bit today. So this episode is going to contain talks of death and suicide. And I'm never going to make light of somebody's own tragedy, but all of these people that we're going to look at today are famous people or people of infamy who have died while on the toilet. And so as we get started, one thing people sometimes think about or may have thought about is how they may die. And I think a lot of times people think about that and they don't think, man, you know what? I think I'm going to cook it right on the toilet. That's where it'll be. I'll dip on out while I'm dropping on down. And in most cases, where you die is almost of no consequence. It's more so how you die or who you were with or what led to the circumstances of your death. But where you die is many times not a big deal, unless, of course, you die on the toilet. And then it gets talked about and written about. And so, before we begin, again, this is not to make light of the death or tragedy of others. This is simply to report on those who have died on the toilet in history and to maybe learn a little bit about what the toilet means for us. And so, this episode is dedicated to the famous folks in history who canned it on the can. Before diving into this, I want to note, again, that this is not to glorify their deaths or make light of much of the circumstances leading up to them. Now on with it. So, there are going to be a number of kings on this list, but only one is the king of rock and roll. Elvis Presley was found dead in front of his toilet at his Graceland mansion on August 16th, 1977. He was pronounced dead from a heart attack, but that heart attack was the result of a number of factors. First, the king's quality of life had declined much toward his final days. He was bedridden, he had a number of health concerns, and so as the king approached his end of life, again, he had health problems. So that's one of the things. There is evidence that includes that the king had an enlarged heart, emphysema, bowel problems, genetic immune disorder, evidence of an autoimmune inflammatory disorder, which could have caused all of them result in the problem of bowels, a bowel struggle. In short, he was mostly bedridden, needing nursing care and assistance. And on top of this, his body was found to contain 10 different types of pharmaceutical drugs. And though it's not believed that any of these were of a lethal dosage to a normal person, with the king's underlying conditions, his bowel problems, they proved enough to serve as an overdose to the king. And we mourn the loss of the king of rock and roll. I'm not going to pretend like I listen to a lot of Elvis. I don't. But he is a name that most, if not every person who has listened to music to some degree knows. So we mourn his death, and it's likely a combination of intestinal distress and the cocktail of drugs leading to a nice amount of vomit. Sometimes here at Privy, we acknowledge that it's time to not be silly. And sometimes we're just reporting some things that have happened. So, from the king of rock and roll, we move to another celebrity, Oz's Dorothy, Judy Garland. Sadly, like the king, Elvis, her death was the result of a misuse of drugs after a life of addiction and health problems. And Judy Garland was found deceased by her fifth husband inside her home bathroom on the toilet in 1969. And it should be noted, before delving further into history, that this is not an exhaustive list. We are looking at some of the better known passings on the pooper. King George II was a German-born monarch in Great Britain. He and his dad were in constant tension as they would later go on to be with his own son. Politically, this caused the things to get backed up at times. So, speaking of being backed up, we need to talk about why he's on our list. You already know he died on a toilet. That's why he's on the list. But the question is, how did he die on the toilet? Well, things got backed up, and as it was straining to pass a particularly pesky poop, that King George II burst a ventricle in his heart, collapsed, and died moments after his attendant rushed in to see what the thud was. And King George II died on the royal throne. And, I don't know how hard you have to strain to blow a ventricle, but man, we talked last episode about laxatives, and we know that they would have existed by this point in history. So find yourself some of those. Get some fiber buddies and get them to help out. Get those going. For the next couple of privy passings, I struggle to think of something worse than these deaths on the toilet. The first is King Edmund II of England, also known as Edmund Ironsides, but perhaps not Edmund Iron Insides. Okay, and is well known for that name because of his opposition against the Danes. In fact, the men of his country were in dispute over whether they were on the side of old Ironsides or his father, or his Danish counterpart, Canute? C-N-U-T. Canute? I know about bathrooms and not language. After his father passed, Canute edged Edmund out militarily, and a month after his return, with Edmund still having a claim to the throne, Edmund was killed. And he was killed in a bathroom. And he was killed on the toilet. And he was stabbed to death on the toilet. Historians believe this was likely an assassination to help Canute seize power more easily. Some even tout that Canute was a Viking, but this is unsure, as his occupation outside of as the King of Denmark is unnamed. And there are a number of disagreements surrounding this. Was it murder? Did he die of complications of battle wounds brought about after the attack while he was on the can? Did the attacker shoot him with an arrow while he was relieving himself? Or did the attack, God forbid, did the attack come from underneath and aim for a more vulnerable spot? Oh, gosh. Oh. Time has put a wall between us and answers, but history has kings who pass it on the toilet, and it seems some had help dying there. Another example of this is Godfrey IV, Duke of Lower Lorraine, which, by the way, that's a long name, and it's a very good name. Godfrey IV, Duke of Lower Lorraine. His name has the word Duke in it, so you know it's going to be pretty great. He was also commonly known as the Hunchback, as he suffered from this condition his whole life. And he seems pretty well revered and was a military leader and had great victories and seemed well liked by his own. However, military success, though it can help you be liked by your own, often, very, very often, leads you to being disliked by those who are not your own. And in Flanders, Godfrey had to visit the little Flanders room and was assassinated. And it says he was stabbed in the hole, for lack of a better way of saying it. He got stabbed in the butthole while pooping and died about a week later from the wounds received. I can't imagine much worse than being stabbed in the butthole. But if there was something, it's being stabbed there and then having to deal with the complications of that for 1 week before you finally cook it. That's just absolutely terrible. Nope, not great. The assassin hiding in your sewer motif occurred even more with the 16th century Japanese warlord, and I'm gonna butcher this one, but I'm gonna try. Yasugi Kenshin. That's probably really bad, and I'm sorry. He was again renowned for his military leadership as well as rivalries and advancement in war technology. And as legend goes, a rival sent an assassin who hid in Kenshin's sewage, which, good on you, that's dedication, and speared him to death while he relieved himself. It's an absolutely, absolutely terrible, awful, no good, horrible, very bad thought and reminder that word spreads slowly. At some point, if you had heard about this, if you had heard in history about somebody receiving a lethal blow to their downstairs zone, you would check your poop space every single time you got ready to make poop there. You would check that. There's no question. There's nothing worse. This is the absolute worst thing that could happen to you in a bathroom. And it happened more than once. It's wild to think about. And sometimes these assassins, which by the way, how long were you chilling in that sewer, assassin friend? How long? There's got to be a cleaner, better, more efficient way to get your mark, for lack of a better word. Anyway, moving on. Sometimes these assassins didn't hide below, but waited for the same time of day to strike. This is the case of Wenceslas III of Bohemia. At this point, we're only shocking about the trope of a king dropping a plop and getting stabbed. Is that Wenceslas didn't have someone sneak up from underneath. Rather, he was relieving himself, and a hired assassin snuck in and killed him with a spear. There is not a lot known about who did the spearing, but they did know when to strike. And they struck when you're the most vulnerable and you're dropping plop and you think you're safe. The next one comes from way back to when you pooped in a pit. Duke Jing of Jin was an ancient Chinese ruler who ruled from 599 to 581 BC. That's a long time ago. The method of bathroom relief at place at that time was to hang ham over the edge and poop it and drop brown and plop it down. Drop it brown and plop it down. The story goes that a shaman to Jing said that he would die an untimely death. And this led to the Duke to have nightmares and anxiety and loss of sleep, and rightfully so. If your shaman rolls in and he says, hey, you're going to die an untimely death, and then he just walks out, that's going to create some anxiety, understandably. Further paranoia set in. The lack of sleep and anxious days led to Jing lack of sleep. So he receives that news, and then he is anxious. He doesn't get enough sleep, and it causes him to not be as aware, and he falls headlong into the Dookie Pit, the pit of nasty. And there he is stuck and later drowned in human fecal matter. Absolutely terrible. You died in the pit of poop because you couldn't get out. And as always, again, this is a reminder that this is not an exhaustive list. And if you guys know of other folks who deserve to be on this list, send those in. Privycast@gmail.com, or reach out to us on social media. we'd love to hear from other folks in history who can be remembered for having, cooked it on the John. So that's, think of it as like a top 8 or 9 of people who can be remembered in history for dying while going to the bathroom. It's wild to think about. So now is time for another installment of Hunter's Anecdotes to keep you afloat. So this story goes back to when I was in college, and I don't know why, but it became customary for some of the people in the dorms to poop with the stall door open. And so I was one of these people, and one of the things that would happen with this is when people would enter the restroom and you were in there pooping, you could throw the stall door open, because there was this big long mirror that stretched the whole length of the bathroom on the opposite wall facing you. And if you angled it right, you could see who had just come into the bathroom if you tossed the door open at the right time. So, pooping with the stall door open is the norm, and for those who live in the dorm, it's expected. Like, if you go into the bathroom, even if the stall is occupied, you're rolling dice on whether or not you're going to see some guy pooping in there. That's just the way it worked, at least in our hall in the dorm that I was in. So, there's few guys who, when you threw the door open, stare at you and give you the look of disgust, like, what's wrong with you, sicko? Sick. Stop. Quit it. Nasty. Anyway, but however, one day I was using the amenities and I hear the bathroom door creak open, and I throw the bathroom stall door open, and I take the standard action. I throw the stall door open, I peek over, and this guy is standing there, and he did not live in our dorm. He was visiting somebody who also lived in the dorm. And so when I pop the door open, he's now just staring on me on the can, doing my business. And he's got the most sour, angry, just beaten look on his face. And he said, what are you doing? And I told him I was going to the bathroom. And he asked why the door wasn't locked. And I said, because we don't do that. This is something we do. And he looked at me and he asked the question. And it's a fair question. It's a good question. He said, why? And I distinctly remember telling him, we do it so no one can sneak up on us and kill us while we're pooping. And then he instantly he was gone. He walked right out of the bathroom and he didn't do his business. So unfortunately for him, he had to go find another bathroom. And then I was the weirdo. So, and that often happens in Hunter's Anecdotes to keep you afloat. Well, this has been Privity. Thank you for listening. As always, we would love for you to leave this episode a rating or leave a comment. 5-star option is our preferred, but this helps folks find this very important work that goes on here in the bathroom with recording equipment. And as always, we would love to have you on social media at PrivyCast. Email us with episode ideas or thoughts or feedback. All those things at privycast@gmail.com. And now, as always, don't forget to flush.